It's the International Soccer Preview. We are Soccer Files Canada. Welcome to Series 25, looking at the players of Euro 2024. This episode is looking at the players of Spain. Here we go. Hello and welcome to the International Soccer Preview by Soccer Files Canada. I'm Kevin, and we continue Series 25 on the groups and players of the 2024 Euro Cup. This episode covers Spain's players. It's actually part 2 of the Players Mediacast, where we look at the selections. In part 1, we made a list of the candidates and introduced them and their likelihood of making the squad. There is a link to part 1 in the show notes. This episode will be divided into 3 sections. In section 1, we look over the list we compiled in part 1 and see who made it and who didn't. In section 2, we summarize surprises in the selection and we review injuries. And in section 3, we revisit the prediction of starters in light of the warm-up games. Let's begin then. So section 1, we're going to go through the list we created and let you know who made it. So the manager has not changed. So Luis de la Fuente will consider having made the squad. Let's go to goalkeepers, and we had 2 definite candidates in Unai Simon and David Raya. Both of those made it, were selected. We had 2 possible goalkeepers, Kepa Arrizabalaga and Alex Romero. We considered their chances fairly equal, and it was Alex Romero who was selected. And by the way, before continuing, I will let you know that Spain selected a 29-man preliminary roster and then had to cut 3 players from it. So we are going to get 3 players on basically just making a preliminary squad, as it were. But that was not Kepa Arrizabalaga. He just simply wasn't selected. And neither was Robert Sanchez or any of the players who were seemingly off the squad. So there we go. That's goalkeepers. Simon, Rea, and Romero selected. Down to central defenders, we had a definite candidate in Robin Le Normand, and he is he was selected. We had the likely candidate Aymeric Laporte also selected, and we had 4 possible candidates. Only one of them was selected, Danny Vivian, there. And Pau Cubarsí was selected, but was one of the 3 players cut. So we'll say he made the preliminary squad there. Inigo Martinez and David Garcia not selected. David Garcia having been an injury doubt there. We'll talk about that in section 2. And possible but unlikely Pau Torres not selected for the squad, but surprisingly, a player who we consider to be off the squad, Nacho Fernandez, was selected. So there we have it, a bit of a surprise there, and not the first one that we will have. Okay, over to left back, and we had a likely candidate in Alejandro Grimaldo, and he was selected. And then we had 4 possible candidates here. Among them, only Marc Cucurella was selected. Jose Luis Gaya and Alejandro Balde both were injury doubts, and it seems like that kept them out. But we do have more details on that, which we'll talk about in section 2. The other possible candidate who was not selected was Fran Garcia, nor was the possible but unlikely Alfonso Pedraza. All right, over to right backs, and we have Dani Carvajal, who was selected, and Jesus Navas, the possible candidate there, also selected. We had actually thought Pedro Porro was almost a likely candidate. Perhaps that's because we follow English soccer, so he's kind of more on our radar. But anyway, the possible Pedro Porro not selected for this tournament, and nor was the possible but unlikely Cesar Azpilicueta, who has participated in every tournament since the 2013 Confederations Cup. So this is the first tournament he will not participate in. We go to defensive midfielders, and we have Rodri as a definite candidate who was selected. We had Martin Zubimendi out as a, or not out, but as a injury doubt. It actually didn't look very promising for him, but he was selected. And we'll talk about that more in section 2. And then we have Hugo Guillamon. No, we just won't mention players who were seemingly off the squad or retired. Central midfielders has our first of 2 new candidates selected for the squad. This one is Fermin Lopez. So I will give a little, no, I'll wait until section 2 to give some biographical information on him. But yes, he was selected for the squad. And there we go. The other central midfielders, sorry, I got lost in my notes there. Were Gavi and Mikel Merino. Gavi, though, was an injury doubt and was not selected. We'll deal with that also in part 2. Mikel Merino, though, the definite candidate, was selected. So actually, we should probably move Gavi down to injured, and we can go up and do that. We should have been doing that, but there's no point in doing it now. Okay, we'll do it from now on. We had a possible, but no, a likely candidate in Fabian Ruiz, and he was selected. We had a possible but unlikely Alex Garcia, but he was selected only for the preliminary squad, though, and then didn't make the final cut. The same is true of the seemingly off the squad Marcos Llorente. So both of those players surprise selections even for the preliminary squad. But having made the preliminary squad, less surprising that they didn't make the final cut, since they both seemed unlikely. Okay, that is central midfielders, and we move to, well, left and right midfielders we are going to talk about a bit later when we talk about the predictions, because actually they used a 4-3-3 formation in both of the warm-up games. So we're going to talk about those positions a little bit. But we don't have any candidates there to talk about here. And so we go down to attacking midfielders. And first of all, dealing with the left side, and there we have our second new candidate, that is Iosi Perez. And so he should actually be highlighted in green here. And we'll talk about him in section 2. We'll introduce him since we didn't do that in section 1. Let's look at the candidates we did have. Mikel Oyarzabal was a likely candidate, and he is selected. We had Dani Olmo as a possible candidate and an injury risk. So he came through both of those to be selected for this squad, Dani Olmo. And none of our 3 possible but unlikely candidates were selected. That's Ansu Fati, Rodrigo Riquelme, and Brian Zaragoza. No room for them on the squad. Over to right attacking players. Nico Williams was a definite candidate and was selected. And the young Lamine Yamal, who I was excited to see, was selected. So I might get to see him if he's a starter, or even if he comes in as a sub. And then we had 3 possible candidates. Jeremy Pino was an injury doubt and was not selected. Ferran Torres was a possible candidate, and he was selected, but Pablo Sarabia not selected there. Central attacking midfielders. Our likely candidate, Olhan Sanset, was not selected for the squad. A bit of a strange story with his injury situations, which makes it look like he simply wasn't selected, but we'll get to that later. The possible candidate, though, Alex Baena, was selected, and possible but unlikely Sergio Canales not selected there. We had Koke and Pedri as seemingly off the squad, but Pedri was selected for the squad despite not having appeared since the World Cup in 2022, which is why we had him at that level. Going to forwards, we have Alvaro Morata as a definite candidate and captain of the team, and he is selected, as is our likely candidate, Joselu. There were two possible candidates there, Marco Asensio and Gerard Moreno. Neither of those two were selected, and we had four players seemingly off the squad who were not selected either. So that is the selection for Spain's team. And now we're going to move on to section 2 and look at some of the surprises there, beginning with notable non-selections. Hang on, I'm in the wrong spot. Most of these are due to injury. Gavi, for example. So yes, I think it's notable because we had him as a definite candidate. So we'll put him on the list here, although we do have a firm reason for it. I would say the other one is the player we just met, Olhan Sanset. He was a likely candidate for us and not selected. That could have been due to injury too. The only thing is he's not on the injury list anymore. So I'll actually deal with him. I'll finish that story here then. So he had a hamstring injury since early May. That's usually a longer term injury, so we thought he would be out. But strangely, his club record showed the last game of the season that he was out not with that injury, but listed as a fever. So we didn't know what that means and if it meant he had recovered from the hamstring injury. Well, further evidence that he had recovered from the injury was that he's no longer on the injury list for the national team here. It had been an unknown return date, and perhaps he had recovered and simply wasn't chosen, or perhaps this hamstring injury played into it. Anyway, that does make him he was our likely candidate, but was not selected. Okay, so those are the notable non-selections, and of course, we have more due to injury. Surprise inclusions, there are several. Nacho Fernandez, the central defender, he had returned after a 4.5-year absence and started one of their remaining 12 games. And he subbed in for one and was on the bench for 2, but then off the team again for the last 8 matches. So Nacho Fernandez surprisingly selected for the squad. Marcos Llorente, well, we won't go into too much detail because he ultimately only made the preliminary squad, but he had looked off the squad for us too, having not appeared since the 2022 World Cup. Similarly, Alex Garcia, though he was cut from the final squad, was a surprise selection even at all, because he had earned his first cap in November 2023. He was subbed in for one and on the bench for one, and then not selected for the last 2 matches. So we thought he had kind of his chance had come and gone, and were surprised that he was picked for the preliminary squad. The last one is, and we won't put Marcos Llorente and Alex Garcia on the list because ultimately they didn't make it. The last one is Pedri, who appeared for the national team last in the 2022 World Cup. So surprised to see him come back. Again, fans more intimate with the Spanish league and players may know the reason or may know what's going on. I mean, the fact is, we last looked at their participation in March, and there's been 3 months of play since then. So perhaps their form was really good, or what have you. Anyway, Pedri selected for the squad. The two new players we'll introduce actually. So Fermin Lopez is with Barcelona in Spain since 2023 and basically came up through Barcelona's youth system. So he hadn't appeared before March 2024. His first appearance was in June here in the warm-up games where he subbed in for the first one and was on the bench for the other. Iosi Perez is quite a bit older. Fermin Lopez is 21 years old. Iosi Perez is 31 years old, so has a much longer club history with Real Betis in Spain since 2023. He was with Leicester in England for 4 years, and before that with Newcastle in England for 5 years. He had come from Tenerife in Spain to Newcastle in 2014. And like Fermin Lopez, he had never appeared for the national team before the warm-up games here, and he started one of those as opposed to Lopez, who subbed into one, and Perez was on the bench for the other one. So those two new players, not sure we'll see them as starters in the cup, but they are on the squad. And we move on to update injuries, and so many things to talk about here. We're actually going to remove a category here. And just talk about players who are recovered from their injury. So I think I won't go into too much detail here because we talked about these in part one. So I'll just give the names. Anyway, Jesus Navas was a injury doubt in part one, but has recovered enough to be selected for the squad. The same is true with Martin Zubamendi, who given that his injury was a hamstring injury since early May, we were quite doubtful about. We had him as a likely candidate. We had Jesus Navas as a possible candidate, and we made those decisions without consideration of their injury, but based mostly on participation. Danny Olmo was also a possible candidate, but overcame muscle problem injuries there. So all three of those recovered enough for injury to be selected. Now, it might be that they're affected by those injuries in the cup, and it could affect their starting position, but we don't know. Players who were dropped, probably due to injury, was, well, definitely Gavi. He had a return date of June 30th, so that was too late to make this cup. And we already talked about Oyhan Sanset, again, not on the injury list there, but his hamstring injury may have played a role in his non-selection. And then a couple of players who were injured but weren't strong candidates anyway. All of these were just possible level, even without consideration of their injury. So that is central defender David Garcia, left defender Jose Luis Gaya, and Jeremy Pino. And I think I should add Alejandro Balde to this list, but the fact is that he is no longer on the injury list, but I do suspect that injury played a role in his non-selection too. Wow, so a lot of teams wouldn't be able to handle so many injuries, but for Spain, they have so much talent that they can absorb this kind of trouble. And actually, that is kind of a lead into section 3 here, predicted starters. You'll see the connection when I talk about the manager here. So, predicted starters. Well, with the manager, we don't talk about whether he's going to start anything. We talk about the warm-up games and what we think the manager was trying to achieve with the warm-up games. First of all, is the choice of playing Andorra and Northern Ireland. They scored 5 games in each of those games. 5 goals in each of those games. So I don't know whether the aim in choosing such weak teams was to fill their boots, but in truth, a lot of the picks that they made are baffling. We did see some evidence in part 1 of the mediacast that the ethic seems to be satisfying a lot of players by giving them starts rather than working towards a cohesive group. Having said that, though, they have done well in their results, even with that strategy, and that's a result of having so much talent. So I'm not really so much critical of it, but just kind of pointing it out. And it made part 1 quite long and difficult because we see several players playing in each position, and a lot of times we can't identify them. Here we see the same, and we're baffled actually by some of the choices. Some positions are stable, like the forward position and the goalkeeper position, and the selection does seem to shed some light on who the starter might be. But in the positions that we felt in part 1 were unstable, we find the decisions here just confuse the matter even further. So we're not really sure what the directive was here. For example, we even have players who the players who were on the preliminary squad and ultimately weren't selected, both of those getting a start in game 1. So fair enough, that might have been to give them one last chance to prove themselves. But we are going to see a lot of bench players and unexpected players playing. So certainly not, we certainly weren't seeing what we think will be the starting squad for Spain. Okay, let's get on with it and talk about goalkeepers. In the warm-up game, it was Raya in the first and Simon in the second. And that basically confirms our own feeling that, or our own deduction that Simon is the starting keeper and Raya is the backup keeper. So it doesn't challenge what we had, which was we had highlighted Simon as the starter quite confidently. So we still think that way. On to defenders and central defenders. I should say in the warm-up game, it was Kubarzi. So we're going to see that all 3 of the players who were cut from the preliminary squad got starts in this game. The other starter alongside him was, I'm on the wrong graphic there. The other player alongside of him was the possible candidate Danny Vivian, who was selected. Neither of those came into our thoughts as far as being starters. In the second game, it was Le Normand, who we consider as one of the starters, and Nacho, who came in from out of the cold. So he was given some time. But all in all, we don't think this undermines our prediction, and we're sticking with Le Normand and Aymeric Laporte as the starting pair. Over to left back. Well, this position was quite unsettled through the period leading up to the Cup. In the warm-up games, it was Grimaldo, our likely candidate, and possible candidate Cucurella. Yes, it very well could be them. Actually, it does. They do look like the starters at this point. It's an unsettled situation, but they do seem like the best candidates at this point. So we think that does boost their likelihood. We do favor Grimaldo over Alejandro, so I guess we'll put him in our blue, which is not fully confident that he will be the starter, but probably the best candidate there. It could be a rotation too. just as it was in the warm-up games. Over to right-back position, and well, we were confident that it was going to be Danny Carvajal. We highlighted him in green. And then in the warm-up game, it was Marcos Llorente, one of the players cut from the squad, and Jesus Navas in the second game. So that puts a bit of a dent in our prediction of Carvajal, who had started 6 of the last games up to March 2024. So we maybe remove the tag from Carvajal, or we'll change it to a blue here, because our confidence is rattled a little bit. So we still think Danny Carvajal is the favored candidate here, or the most likely, I should say. Okay, over to defensive midfield. Here too, we were thrown for a loop. They went with the 4-3-3 formation. So we actually didn't separate the positions of a kind of center midfield and left midfielder and right midfielder, but we are going to do that when we talk about it here. In the center of that 4-3-3, it was used in both games, and we had predicted Rodri as the starter. He started the second of those games, so we're still fairly confident in him as a starter, but our confidence is shaken a bit more by the kind of unpredictability of the manager in these games. So we wonder if he'll continue experimenting into the cup. So we doubt it, but we're going to put Rodri, change him from our confident green to our less confident blue, but still seeing him as a good candidate. Okay, so Alex Garcia, the player who was cut from the squad, started the first of those games. Rodri had started the second, so Alex Garcia off the squad and not a consideration here. We had nominated Gavi. We were kind of viewing the midfielders as just one group of players, and we had nominated Gavi without taking into account that he was injured. So we just got to take that tag off him because he's not even selected. And we now look for other candidates. So we'll keep our eye on this list, but we are going to separate it into left midfielders and right midfielders here. So on the left side, in the warm-up games, we saw central attacking midfielder Alex Baena in game 1. We had him just as a possible candidate, as we'll see shortly. And in game 2, it was the more likely central midfielder Fabian Ruiz, who we had as a likely candidate. Baena hadn't started any games at all since the beginning of 2023. So we're a bit surprised that he was even selected, let alone starting. Anyway, we do doubt that Baena will be a starter. We do think possibly, though, Ruiz could be a starter. Maybe this is an indication that he will be. But we don't really feel it's strong enough evidence to nominate him as a starter. So we're going to leave this blank. So Rodri remains our only highlight here as someone we think is going to start. On the right side, it's even more surprising, or more surprising than Alex Garcia in the middle or Alex Baena on the left. It is attacking midfielder Pedri playing both warm-up games as a right midfielder. So he came from out of the wilderness, having last appeared in the 2022 World Cup, and actually among the 6 midfield positions, 5 different players were there. Pedri was the only one to start twice. So does this mean that he's going to come basically out of the cold into a starting position? We're not quite ready to say that. It could mean that. But really, we're baffled. We're baffled that he was brought back in and started in both games. So we're going to leave it blank. Again, Rodri, the only player we have any confidence to say is going to be a starter. Okay, we go up to attacking midfielders and we look at the left side here. in the warm-up games, it was newcomer Iosi Perez in the first game. So particularly in the first game, we see that he's giving these less likely players a chance. In the second game, it was Nico Williams, who we is actually coded as a right winger. Nico Williams playing on the left, but he had done so in several games since the start of 2023. And of course, in the 4-3-3 formation, he's playing as a left forward. So we did see Williams as a possible candidate, but he was one among a few. And we didn't actually expect him to be the starter on the left. So we really don't have enough confidence to nominate him as a starter. But maybe when we get there, we'll put him in blue. I'll do that right now because we'll be dealing with the right attackers soon. Okay, so we really don't have anyone on the left side that we think is going to be a starter. Again, right winger sometimes came over and played the role, so it was quite unclear. So we will nominate Nico Williams as a potential starter, perhaps on the left or perhaps on the right. On the right forward position in the warm-up games, it was Ferran Torres, then Lamine Yamal. So even more so than the other positions, this one was particularly chaotic, with no player starting more than 3 times over their 12 games since 2023. And I think it adds up to about 7 players in the position because we had, excuse me. Okay, I'm over that little fit. We had 4 players playing with just single appearances, so all sorts of players over here. So we can't begin to nominate anyone in this position, and then overall for attacking midfielders or attacking players, attacking midfielders, we only have Nico Williams as someone who we're somewhat confident will start. Central attacking position was not used in the warm-up games and was only used in 25% of the games since the start of 2023. Actually, Gavi was the one who occupied the position the most, so he's gone. So we don't think Baena or Pedro, they're both labelled as attacking midfielders who we saw playing in other positions, will necessarily be starters. So nothing to highlight here. On to forwards, and this is strikingly different situation because we had a player who we were confidently highlighting in green, and then he started both of the games, so strengthened our confidence. So definite candidate, Alvaro Morata, and captain of the team, we do see as a definite starter. So one of the few positions that we can be sure about and that are quite straightforward. All right, well, that brings us to the end and closing thoughts. I only say, I think I've sounded a bit critical of the constant changes in and out. But I am aware that Spain has been doing that for quite a while and have been quite successful with that. So it's not really my place to have an opinion on it, but does make it a bit hard to do a mediacast on. Anyway, enjoy the cup, and we will see you for our next team. We would like to thank Mike Kripak, Big Sound Music, and Pixabay for the wonderful background music called Dance 90s accompanying this mediacast.